The US president invites like-minded leaders in an apparent effort to reinforce global democracy.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Summit for Democracy.
But at a time when Washington's own credibility is under question, the invitation-only event has come under fire by friends and foes alike. I'm Jafar Hasnan, and today's newsmaker is Joe Biden's Divisive Democracy Summit. Democracy originated from Greek city-states in the 5th century BC. The word simply refers to a form of government in which power rests with the people. Winston Churchill called it the worst form of government except for all the others. And while it may be the best system people have come up with, it works very differently in different parts of the world. But President Joe Biden is hoping to position himself and the United States as a beacon of democracy. The virtual summit aims to fight corruption, authoritarianism, and the erosion of human rights. The countries attending have been asked to make a solid pledge to further democracy at home. But the list of who was and who was not invited has drawn criticism. Non-profit group Freedom House says 1/3 of the attendees are only partly democratic. So, is this spectacle more about American alliances and interests than values? Donald Cameron takes a look.
America has a long history of dividing the world into countries it does and doesn't like. Ronald Reagan called the Soviet bloc the evil empire. George W. Bush called Iraq, Iran, and North Korea the axis of evil. Now Joe Biden's come up with his own list of who's naughty and nice by inviting 110 countries to the US's inaugural Summit for Democracy. So who made the cut? The majority are from Europe and the Western Hemisphere, 66 to be precise. 25 from Asia Pacific, 17 from Africa, and just 2 from the Middle East. There's Iraq, Angola, and the DRC, which is democratic in name only. Other odd inclusions are Brazil's president Jair Bolsonaro, known as the Trump of the tropics, as well as Philippine strongman Rodrigo Duterte, who's being investigated by the ICC for crimes against humanity. There's also Poland, which is being fined €1 million a day by the European Court of Justice for violating EU judicial independence laws. And who's been left out? Notably absent are EU member Hungary and the US's fellow NATO ally Turkey. Bangladesh also wasn't invited, despite the inclusion of Pakistan and India, which was ranked worst among all backsliding democracies, and was even criticized by the US State Department this year for a lack of accountability for misconduct at all government levels. Bolivia, which has had fairly robust elections since the 80s, also missed the memo, as did the Gambia, which has made the world's biggest democratic progress over the past 5 years, moving from authoritarianism to a fragile democracy. Bosnia and Herzegovina, whose democratic system was imposed by a US-brokered peace agreement, was the only Balkan nation excluded, while neighboring Serbia's increasingly autocratic president Aleksandar Vučić is in, a leader who grows closer to Russia and China by the day. No surprises those two weren't invited, but dividing the world was always bound to cause tension, and Beijing took it rather personally.
The US puts together a summit in the name of democracy without consulting the international community or coordinating with the UN or other international bodies. Is this called humility? The US puts half of the world's countries into a category of so-called non-democracies with its own yardstick. Is this called humility? In the name of democracy, the US has launched military interventions in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and other countries, leading to hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths and displacing tens of millions. Instead of learning lessons and correcting its mistakes, the US has even gone further to instrumentalize and weaponize democracy by openly convening this so-called Summit for Democracy to incite division and confrontation for its geopolitical strategy and gains. Is this called humility?
It's not just that the uninvited are being sore losers. Critics say the summit is naive and tone-deaf at a time when democratic standards and norms are falling in the US itself. The United States comes in at number 61 on Freedom House rankings of democracies. And the Sweden-based International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance classed the US as a backsliding democracy for the first time this year. A year which saw supporters of a president who refused to accept electoral defeat storm the physical heart of America's democracy. And critics point out other shortcomings. The popular vote is how most democracies hold elections. But in the US, the president is indirectly picked by just 538 people. The Electoral College system is charged with not being truly representative. And a popular vote would have put Hillary Clinton in the White House. And then there's voter suppression, politically motivated appointments of judges, redistricting and gerrymandering, and, arguably, prejudiced law enforcement that privileges the white and wealthy.
The record of the United States on human rights, and in particular freedom of the press, is certainly not perfect. We've seen cases of journalists and news outlets who have been surveilled and spied on by the Department of Justice. We've seen throughout the United States at protests, police and law enforcement attacking journalists.
After the polite talk and the photo op, will realpolitik be what's really been strengthened? And at a time when worrying trends collide with global challenges, will the United States have only made the world less united? Donald Cameron, The Newsmakers.
Well, you saw there from the report, Biden's so-called democracy summit has been on the receiving end of some serious criticism. So why did Washington decide to hold it, and has it actually achieved anything? To discuss all this and more, I'm joined now from Gökçay, Azerbaijan, by Matthew Bryza. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. George Szamuely is in Budapest. He is a senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute. And Klaus Jurgens is a political analyst, and he joins us now live from Ankara. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Now, I want to kick off this discussion with a plain and simple question. Matthew, you have served as an official of the United States. Tell me, what is the US's definition of democracy?
Yeah, that's something I wrestled with a lot, including during my 4 years at the White House when I was overseeing our relations with Turkey and the countries of Central Asia and the South Caucasus. So it's a very fluid definition. And usually it focuses on there being competitive elections or free and fair elections. It focuses on the sort of institutions of democracy, the mechanisms, sort of the nuts and bolts. What it fails to do, however, though, is focus on the culture of democracy. And it fails to take into account how some countries, are at a different stage of cultural development or have values that are different from our own, and are never going to develop a democracy that looks like ours. So I guess the simple definition is, for the U.S. government, very often, a democracy is a political system that looks like what we believe ours is and what we believe our closest allies' systems are, especially in Europe.
All right, Klaus, let me come to you. Now, the United States is no stranger to questioning democracies in other countries. Tell me, do you think the U.S. is a pure form of democracy, given it has a system through which it elects its president based on electoral college, not by popular vote?
Well, glad for being on the show. It's a very good question, to be honest. Now, I think it all boils down to a definition of democracy and what is in it for the people. Preparing for today, I thought about as well, is it all about political science? Is there a specific form of democracy, for example, in the United States, which is not compatible with any other country? And then I said, look, how can we measure the impacts of a democracy on the people? And I came one step further. I concluded it is about the quality of life for and of the individual citizen this is how we should measure democracy. And in this regard, there is no perfect place. Every country has some ups and downs. And inviting to a conference like this, a democracy summit, is a very good idea. I'm sure we will come back to who was actually invited and who not. But only saying that the host nation has a blueprint for what makes a democracy tick for the individual citizens, I think that would be overdoing it a little bit.
Okay, George, now let's talk about the summit. It has come under heavy criticism from many. Now, many are saying that Joe Biden is hosting this summit in order to portray the United States as the beacon of democracy to the world. Tell me, does the United States have the moral authority or perhaps the credibility to lecture other countries on democracy?
No, it absolutely hasn't. And it's entirely fitting that on this day, the UK High Court has ruled that the extradition of Julian Assange can go ahead to the United States. He's the most famous journalist in the world, and he is essentially being put on trial in the United States for the terrible crime of journalism. But the rest of the world, when they look upon the United States, they often find themselves the victims of a democracy. Now let's imagine here's Nicaragua. Nicaragua, obviously, it's under sanction. It's not regarded as a democracy, even though they have elections. But Nicaragua remembers in the 1980s, the same president who's today heading Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, he was around in the 1980s, and the United States was waging a terroristic war against his government and actually mined its ports, which the World Court ruled was illegal. And then again, you look at other countries. I mean, how does Iran feel about democracy when it has been subjected to terrible sanctions, even though it has adhered to the agreement that it had actually signed with the United States? And one can go on. Again, President Maduro also won elections. The European Union recently found the election that was conducted in Venezuela was actually pretty decent. He can't get his hands on his own resources. His gold is being held in the UK bank. So, here we have a democracy summit. What does the rest of the world think? They don't really care that much that they haven't been invited, but they don't think these democracies have done them very much good.
Okay. I just want to pick up on one thing you said. What does the rest of the world think? Matthew, now, in a poll conducted in 2021, right across March and April, it was commissioned by the Alliances of Democracies Foundation among 50,000. It included 50,000 respondents, and it was conducted in about 53 countries. According to the findings, most of the people see the U.S. as a bigger threat to democracy than China and Russia. So does the U.S. have an image problem?
Oh, it does. It definitely does. And, I often think about how I would have been able to, or not been able to, fulfill my instructions from Washington were I in the field again now, well, here in Azerbaijan as ambassador, for example, given what has happened to American democracy. I mean, what happened on January 6th with the insurrection and the attack on the U.S. Capitol, that really damaged not just the reputation of American democracy, but democracy itself. And, we still have a large number of, the majority of Republicans, so members of that party, which I'm very close to, by the way, the party, not these people, who still falsely claim that Joe Biden stole the last election. There have been over 70 court cases that have looked at this question. Each and every one determined that, no, of course the election wasn't stolen. Yet, one of the U.S.'s two political parties, which enjoys about a 50% following in the United States, still believes the lie that the election was stolen. And there's a strong possibility that, as election laws change, in the individual 50 US states, and many of them that is, during the next presidential election in 2024, if the Republicans lose, the candidate who may be Donald Trump may do the same thing and this time be able to reverse the election. So I strongly agree that the United States should not now be lecturing to any other country about democracy. We need to focus on saving our own democracy.
Okay, Klaus, then do you think this so-called democracy summit is more about promoting US's interests than it is about promoting democracy across the world?
Yes, this is something I really thought about before coming here. Now, first of all, there was the invitation list. Pretty much sure we will still come back to that point. I think it is about politics. It is about public relations for the host nation. And it should not be about lecturing about democracy. An event like this should be about talking and listening. So there is a political dimension, and I am pretty certain that there is a political dimension with regards who was actually put onto that infamous list. Now, if you want to promote not yourself, but democracy, you should learn from democracies. You should learn how other countries overcame obstacles. And as I've mentioned, every country on the road to democracy had obstacles. But ultimately, it went well. So I think, yes, I wouldn't say it is only about one issue, but definitely it is about politics and promoting, yes, indeed, what my esteemed colleague just said, yes, promoting the United States.
Okay. Now, certainly there is growing criticism that holding the summit was not a great idea. George, what could have been an alternative to it?
Well, the alternative to it is not to hold a summit. Look, it makes sense in the Cold War, when you had these kinds of conferences, there was at least an ideological conflict. There was on the one side, there was the bloc, the free market democracy, for want of a better term, bloc, led by the United States, and then there was the socialist bloc led by the Soviet Union. There was an ideological conflict about which is the best form of government. So it made sense. But here, this is an entirely fictional notion that there's any kind of a struggle today between authoritarians, as Biden puts it, and the democracies. Neither Russia nor China is seeking to export its form of government. Russia doesn't say, well, our form of government is superior to that of anyone else. It says our form of government works for us. China says the same thing. China says, it works for us. It's not attempting to impose this on others. But these people, the people, particularly the United States and the leading NATO powers like the United Kingdom, they do want to impose their form of government on others. When they bring on all these civil society types and they talk about the open society foundations and all the rest, that's what they're trying to do. They are trying to create a cadre of individuals who will be on hand to take power in the countries that have not been invited. And so, therefore, this is an ideological struggle that has been launched by the West, not by those who are standing in opposition.
Okay. Now, Matthew, right before this program, I was wondering, doesn't this summit make the world more polarized? We are in the midst of a global pandemic, which requires a collective global response.
I really agree with you. I mean, to go back to the last question you answered, George, I think the alternative to having a summit of democracies where the U.S. has to choose who's a democracy and who's not could have been a summit meeting of all that focuses on human dignity or justice in the pandemic. and making sure that, not 5%, but just 7% of the people who live in Africa have been vaccinated against COVID-19. I mean, these are the things we need to be focusing on, or the very unfair, unjust division or sharing of wealth around the world. This is what's called, there should be a summit for, as you're saying, Jeff, countering polarization. And you're in Turkey. I live in Turkey. I have to be in Azerbaijan now. But to me, it's outrageous that Turkey's not invited to this summit, or Hungary as well. There are plenty of things to criticize about democracy, or system, be it in Turkey or in Hungary or in the United States. But to exclude these NATO members, right, from the summit, to me, that just smacks of polarizing politics. I think that in the White House, the folks organizing this summit figured, well, we can't invite everyone from Europe, so popularly, who gets the most criticism? Oh, okay, that's Hungary and Turkey, maybe Poland, but so many Polish Americans, so we have to include Poland. So I think this has become a polarizing event, and were it to rally some sort of democratic momentum, pro-democracy momentum in the countries that were invited, well, that could be a good. But I don't think that's going to happen either. I think this is just going to be a bunch of slogans thrown around, and there's really not going to be any follow-up.
Klaus, would you agree?
Yes, this is actually the point I was hoping for. Pretty much sure it would come up. Yes, if you have a democracy summit, you should invite a number of role models too. You mentioned the Republic of Turkey already. Now, what happened here after a sensationally bad financial crisis early in the new millennium, Turkey actually showed that you can establish a fully functioning market economy. At the same time, you can allow civil society to flourish. You set up the middle classes. You build a rock-solid foundation democracy. There are, of course, threats to that, as we all remember, but Turkey would have been a fantastic example of how a nation can build democracy and how the people actually value and cherish it. I'm very, very sad that Turkey was not invited. I fully agree with what you just said. Now, let's see what happens next. I don't think that there will be a copycat anytime soon, but there is already negativity in many of the comments, and unfortunately, this invitation list, for example, not having Turkey on it, we read The Economist, we read other articles, and then they say Turkey was not invited because it has been sliding into an authoritarian form of country. Well, I would say, please come over here and take a look for yourself. So yes, it's a personal viewpoint, but definitely everyone could have taken a look and learned quite a lot from how Turkey established democracy and how it continues to defend it, because the people actually want it.
Okay, George, let's focus on the selection criteria, the invitation criteria for this summit. Did it work this way? Hey, you are my buddy, you're invited. You're not invited.
Well, I think so. The omission of Hungary was quite extraordinary. Now, Hungary is a democracy. It's a member of the European Union. It's a member of NATO. If it wasn't a democracy, it wouldn't be in the European Union. It wouldn't be in NATO. Right now, we read in the newspapers that that the coming election in Hungary next May will be a close contest. I mean, Viktor Orban may or may not be re-elected. So how can it not be a democracy if the reigning government has a good chance of actually losing the election? So, but Orban, he had fallen out of favor with some of the people in Brussels, and he has fallen out of favor with the Biden administration because Antony Blinken's father, Donald Blinken, he had been an ambassador to Hungary in the 1990s when Hungary was ruled by very different people from that of Orban. And Orban had actually very good relations with Donald Trump. So it was largely a personal matter of omitting him. And of course, well, I mean, Turkey has already been addressed by my colleagues. Again, a bizarre decision given the strategic importance of Turkey, and that Turkey is important in the Middle East, it's important in North Africa, it's important in its relations with Russia.
You're trying to reach is
so why a snub for Erdogan makes no sense in any geostrategic sense. And this democracy summit is, of course, about American geopolitics. It is seeking to mobilize the world against the two geopolitical rivals that the United States has identified, namely Russia and China.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today here on the Newsmakers. We really appreciate your taking out the time. Now, thanks for watching. You can follow us on Twitter at @_Newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Jafar Hasnan. See you next time.